On April 8, 1943, at 27,000 feet above Caen, France, Oberleutnant Ralph Hermachin couldn't hide his grin behind his oxygen mask. He watched as awkward silhouettes struggled toward his formation through the clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5. The veteran ace from Yagkashvada, aged 26, observed the American fighters making their combat debut over occupied Europe. He joked to his wingman that the American forces had sent flying milk bottles. He couldn't help but laugh when he saw the large Republic P-47 Thunderbolt aircraft struggling to gain altitude. Below them, 16 P-47 C Thunderbolts from the 4th Fighter Group were climbing in a tight formation. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engines labored against their 7-ton weight. To the German pilots, used to the sleek Spitfires and agile Soviet fighters, these bulky American planes looked almost foolish. They had barrel-shaped fuselages topped with greenhouse canopies, wings that seemed inadequate for their hefty frames, and propellers that overshadowed anything in the Luftwaffe's arsenal. What Hermachin had no idea about, and what none of the German pilots circling above could have foreseen, was that they were witnessing the arrival of a weapon that would systematically dismantle the Luftwaffe's fighter force. Within 18 months, these so-called flying milk bottles would evolve from objects of ridicule into tools of terror. Their .850 caliber Browning machine guns would become the most dreaded sound in German skies. The mechanics of devastation were already embedded in those wide wings. With 3,400 rounds of ammunition and a combined firing rate of 6,000 rounds per minute, they had enough concentrated firepower to slice through a Messerschmitt in less than 2 seconds. That transformation began on that April morning when Major Donald Bliley, a 2 seconds, commander of the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation preparing to attack. The former Eagle Squadron pilot, who had just transitioned from Royal Air Force Spitfires weeks earlier, grasped what his men did not yet understand. Survival in the P-47 would require them to forget everything they believed about aerial combat. The Thunderbolt was a radical departure from conventional fighter design. While the Germans had focused on lightweight interceptors for climbing and turning, Republic Aviation had forged something entirely new, a high-altitude powerhouse that utilized mass, momentum, and firepower to change aerial warfare forever. On the morning of April 8, 1943, there were 56 American pilots flying over France. Among them were future legends, ace pilots whose names would instill fear in the hearts of Luftwaffe personnel. However, at that moment, they were inexperienced rookies in a new aircraft. They were up against the most skilled fighter force in the world. The Germans had been fighting since 1939 with seasoned veterans from battles in Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. In contrast, the Americans had not seen a single day of combat. This tale illustrates how industrial logic outmatched tactical skill. It shows how quality and quantity combine to create overwhelming power. The laughter of German pilots turned to horror when they realized the devastation that synchronized Browning machine guns could unleash on an aircraft from 400 yards. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was born out of urgency in June 1940. As German fighters dominated the skies over France, Alexander Kartveli, the chief designer at Republic Aviation, received an urgent request from the United States Army Air Forces. They needed a high-altitude interceptor that could compete with the best of the Luftwaffe. Instead, Kartveli created a formidable aircraft that pushed boundaries. He told his design team, "It will be a dinosaur, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." When the XP-47B prototype first took to the skies on May 6, 1941, it astonished everyone who saw it. Weighing 9,900 pounds empty, it was 65% heavier than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. The large turbo supercharger system, featuring complex ducting through the rear fuselage, gave the aircraft a unique, bulging appearance. Test pilots often asked, "Does this thing really fly?" Not only did it fly, but it soared like no other at altitude. The Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower, maintained full power at 27,000 feet. This was where the German fighters struggled to breathe. The turbo supercharger, powered by exhaust gases, provided sea-level performance even in the thin air of the stratosphere where conventional superchargers failed. Major Hubert Hub Zukowski, who led the 56th Fighter Group training in Bridgeport, Connecticut, originally had a strong dislike for the aircraft. Between September 1942 and January 1943, his unit experienced the tragic loss of 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents. The P-47 caused more American casualties in training than what the Germans would inflict in the initial months of combat. It often ground-looped on the runway. Landing was tricky. The aircraft could torque roll on takeoff. Pilots dove with such enthusiasm that they encountered compressibility issues, causing their controls to freeze as shock waves formed on the wings. However, those who mastered the aircraft uncovered something remarkable. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma and later one of America's top aces with 27 victories, described his first flight as strapping yourself to a locomotive. He found the power to be astonishing. You didn't just fly it, you aimed it. The initial combat encounters in April and May of 1943 confirmed every German bias. The P-47 Thunderbolts could not turn with the Focke-Wulf 190, could not climb with the Messerschmitt 109, and lacked the nimble handling needed at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots quickly devised tactics to take advantage of these shortcomings. They attacked from below where the heavy Thunderbolt struggled. They forced dogfights where agility was more crucial than firepower. Hutchman Josef Pips Priller, the commanding officer of Yagkashvada 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter. He stated that the new American fighter was prime for destruction. He described it as flying like a truck, turning like a freight train, and climbing like a pregnant cow. The pilots referred to the P-47s as Indiana, calling them fat targets pretending to be warriors. The statistics seemed to back up the German confidence. In their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The Royal Air Force, observing from their Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested that the Americans might want to rethink their aircraft choice. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the spacious cockpit. However, something peculiar occurred in those early encounters that German intelligence failed to recognize. The P-47s that were shot down had endured incredible damage before succumbing. One aircraft returned from a mission on May 4th with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes damage that would have made a Messerschmitt or a Spitfire disintegrate. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, shrugged off hits that would have incapacitated a liquid-cooled fighter. More importantly, when the P-47s got their guns on target, the effects were devastating. The Thunderbolt's weapons created a zone of destruction that German pilots had never faced before. In the early days of the war, American fighters had a significant advantage. Unlike the aircraft armed with cannons that had limited ammunition, the American fighter could unleash continuous fire for more than 30 seconds. This was a long time in aerial combat. A pivotal event occurred on June 26, 1943, over Lazo, France. This incident involved 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson from the 61st Fighter Squadron. It would become legendary on both sides of the conflict. Johnson was leading a formation of 48 P-47 Thunderbolts returning from a mission. They were suddenly attacked by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from Yagkashvada 26, led by Headman Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of the renowned Adolf Galland. The German pilots executed a flawless attack, diving from above with significant speed advantage. Johnson, flying at the rear of the formation, quickly found himself in multiple attackers' crossfire. His aircraft suffered catastrophic damage in just moments. 20mm cannon shells exploded around him, the canopy shattered, hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cockpit, and the engine cowling tore away, igniting a fire behind the instrument panel. Johnson sustained injuries to his nose and leg from shrapnel and bullet fragments. He attempted to bail out but discovered the canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, sealing it shut. He was trapped in a failing aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied all expectations regarding combat damage tolerance. Johnson, with no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, managed to maintain control of the aircraft despite a barely functioning engine that shook violently and unresponsive controls. He directed the P-47 toward England. Remarkably, it continued to fly, with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to pieces. Then the situation worsened. A single Focke-Wulf 190, piloted by an unidentified German fighter, found Johnson's crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the English Channel at under 170 miles per hour. Historical research has not conclusively identified this pilot, although several names have surfaced from German combat reports of that day. What followed was one of the most extraordinary encounters in aerial warfare history. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with his 20mm cannon and two 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to maneuver or escape, could only take cover behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load. As the German pilot repositioned, he fired again. The German pilot, having run out of cannon ammunition, flew alongside the damaged aircraft. He stared at the flying wreck in disbelief. Johnson clearly saw the pilot's young, blonde face. His expression changed from confidence to confusion, and then to something resembling fear. The German then repositioned and fired the last of his machine gun ammunition at the Thunderbolt. Yet it continued to fly. Again he flew next to Johnson, shook his head in astonishment, gave a casual salute, and turned away, likely out of ammunition. Johnson's P-47 managed to land at Manston with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after hitting 200. One cannon shell had exploded just inches from Johnson's head. Another detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine suffered direct hits, and the control cables were partially severed. 3 of the 4 main longerons, which are essential to the fuselage's structure, were shot through. Still, the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had underestimated their own creation. Meanwhile, German intelligence, receiving combat reports from the second section of Yagkashvada 26, initially refused to believe it. They thought no aircraft could take that much damage. However, testimonies from multiple pilots confirmed the unbelievable. The Thunderbolt had withstood everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could throw at it and had survived. By July 1943, American pilots had begun to understand how to leverage the true strengths of the P-47. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zehner, the commander of the 56th Fighter Group, discovered this secret through harsh trial and error. The key was not to turn or climb with the German fighters at low altitude. Instead, they needed to use their weight, their power, and their guns. The P-47's significant weight, which had initially been viewed as a disadvantage, became an asset. In a dive, nothing could outpace it. From an altitude of 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach speeds of 550 miles per hour. Faster than any German fighter could manage, even in a vertical dive. This speed could easily be turned into altitude during a zoom climb, leaving pursuing fighters behind helplessly. Captain Walker Bard Mahurin, who would later become one of the first American aces in Europe, developed what would be known as the boom and zoom tactic. However, pilots referred to it as the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in standard dogfights, P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, a height that was beyond the effective operating range of the German fighters. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would flip upside down and dive. They reached speeds that made it impossible for the German defenders to shoot back. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns opened fire. German pilots who managed to survive said it felt like facing a wall of lead. The combined firepower created an unstoppable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this deadly pattern didn't just fall, they disintegrated. The true power of American fire became clear on August 17, 1943. This was during a dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, which was the deepest penetration into Germany attempted up to that point. The mission showed both the P-47's limitations, especially its range even with drop tanks, and its terrifying effectiveness when used correctly. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, spotted a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft, preparing to attack B-17 bombers with their heavy cannons and rockets. The twin-engine German fighters, while heavily armed, were less maneuverable. They were the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts dove into their attack from 28,000 feet. Unaflitzier Hinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Messerschmitts who survived, later recounted during an interrogation. He said, The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. I hit well. I saw the rounds strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. It wasn't just shot down, it was destroyed. The wings separated from the fuselage, the tail was severed, and the crew compartment was shredded into metal confetti. In just 2 seconds, 110 became nothing. 8 Messerschmitt hundreds and hundreds were destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never faced such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, totaling 3,400 rounds, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At the convergence distance usually set at 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone about 6 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced 100 rounds per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself showcased American industrial capabilities. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon ammunition, UK Sudanese, typically only 120 to 200 rounds for a 20mm weapon, American pilots could keep firing for over half a minute. The standard combat load was mixed. The P-47 Thunderbolt utilized armor-piercing incendiary tracer, and standard ball ammunition in ways that both destroyed and ignited targets. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gaby Gabreski, who would later become the leading American ace in Europe with 28 victories, spoke about the impact. He said that when all 8 guns hit a target, they did not just go down, they exploded. He witnessed a Messerschmitt 109 literally sliced in half, with the tail going one way and the nose and wings going another. The pilot never had a clue what struck him. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was facing another grim truth about the P-47. The aircraft's performance improved significantly at higher altitudes, while German fighters struggled. The turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine kept its rated power output up to 30,000 feet. In contrast, German fighters that relied on single or two-stage mechanical superchargers began to lose performance above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's top aces with 206 victories, faced this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. While leading Jagdgeschwader against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190 A6 sluggish and unresponsive in the thin atmosphere. The BMW 801 engine, powerful at medium altitudes, was struggling for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When the P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters became easy targets. Robert Johnson, a seasoned combat pilot on his way to becoming an ace, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its detailed nose art. Johnson's combat report was straightforward. He opened fire at 300 yards with a 30-degree deflection. He noted strikes along the entire fuselage, leading to the enemy aircraft exploding. No parachute was seen. Philipp's demise sent shockwaves throughout the Luftwaffe. If one of their finest, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions on both the Eastern and Western fronts, could not withstand the Thunderbolts, what hope did the average pilots have? The German High Command called for an immediate investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report submitted to Reich Marshal Hermann Göring in November 1943 contained sobering news. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, surpassing any German fighter's reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor consisted of a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, a 1/2-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates surrounding the engine. Its sturdy design allowed it to take hits that would cripple 3 regular fighters and still make it home. In January 1944, a new version of the P-47 started arriving in England. This marked the shift from a laughing point to a true threat. The P-47 D-22 came equipped with a Hamilton standard hydrostatic propeller. This propeller had paddle blades that measured 13 feet in diameter, with broad blades that dug into the air like enormous oars. The climb rate improved significantly. Earlier Thunderbolts climbed at an unimpressive 2,200 feet per minute at sea level. In contrast, the paddle blade models could reach 3,000 feet per minute, matching or even surpassing German fighters at many altitudes. The large propeller also enhanced acceleration. enabling the P-47s to gain speed more quickly in level flight. Hetman Knoker of Yagkashvada 11, a seasoned pilot with over 200 combat missions, faced the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He noted in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We attacked a formation near Hanover, thinking we had the advantage. They turned into us and climbed alongside. When we tried to break away, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. There was nothing left but smoke and debris. These are not the same planes we laughed at last year." The paddle blade propeller did more than enhance performance. It altered the sound of the Thunderbolt as well. The distinctive roaring noise created by the tips of the blades reaching supersonic speeds could be heard from miles away. German ground forces reported they could identify incoming P-47s by sound alone. It signaled a deep, ominous rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s outfitted with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The typical setup included two 108-gallon wing tanks or a 75-gallon belly tank, increasing the range to over 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade propeller enhancing performance even when heavily loaded, Thunderbolts could engage right after dropping the tanks. The Luftwaffe shifted its focus to bombers, aiming to inflict enough damage to halt the American daylight campaign. However, this meant flying through the P-47 escort, which was becoming an increasingly deadly task. German pilots developed a reluctant respect, bordering on fear, for the powerful American fighters. Major G. Aral, one of Germany's top aces, with 275 victories mostly on the Eastern Front, had a close call with P-47s on March 6, 1944. He was left seriously injured. In a post-war interview, he shared, "We saw them above us, large silhouettes against the sun. Someone joked, 'Here come the flying pigs.' But nobody was laughing just 30 seconds later. They dove down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. On their first pass, they wiped out 3 of our fighters, turning them into burning wreckage. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They unleashed continuous streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death. The escort missions highlighted another advantage of the P-47, endurance. While German fighters operated at maximum power, rapidly burning through fuel, the big American radial engines could cruise efficiently at high altitudes. Thunderbolts could stay with the bombers for hours, providing top cover while ensuring enough fuel for combat and return. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over long-range escort duties in spring 1944, P-47 units shifted focus to ground attack. This role would make them one of the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The shift picked up speed in April 1944, as the Allies readied for the invasion of France. The heavy machine gun battery of the Thunderbolt proved highly effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles. The sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst unleashed 160 half-inch projectiles over an area the size of a truck. However, it was the addition of bombs and rockets that truly turned the P-47 into a versatile powerhouse. The D-25 variant could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under its wings and a 500-pound bomb under the fuselage equivalent to early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each comparable to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in so low that you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying. Engines roared, rockets screamed, and then the heavy machine guns pounded away. A column of our truck simply vanished. 20 vehicles turned to burning wreckage in just one pass. The impact on the men was devastating. They referred to them as Jabos, fighter bombers. But these planes were more than that. They functioned like flying artillery, striking with the precision of snipers. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe realized the balance of power had shifted completely. Over 500 P-47 Thunderbolts provided air cover for the invasion, forming an impenetrable shield over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were decimated. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Yagkashvada 21, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, remarked that the sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level up to 30,000 feet. We tried to engage at dawn with 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one who returned. The P-47s waited at every altitude. You could not climb above them, and you could not dive below them. Their guns turned our planes into aluminum rain. In the weeks after D-Day, P-47 systematically dismantled German movements in daylight. The numbers were staggering. In June alone, the 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to operate only at night, severely limiting their response to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, and developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing proved effective. The P-47's mix of speed, armor, and firepower made it nearly unstoppable. Even the dreaded 88mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitudes. While wreaking havoc in Europe, the P-47 was also demonstrating its value in the Pacific theater. The 348 Fighter Group, operating out of New Guinea, found that the Thunderbolt's attributes were ideally suited to the vast distances and harsh conditions of the Pacific War. Colonel Neil Kirby, the commander of the 348th, developed specific tactics for that theater. On October 11, 1943, Kirby led 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, personally shooting down 6 enemy planes in one mission, which earned him the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, used to fighting agile yet fragile American fighters, were not prepared for the P-47's combination of firepower and resilience. Japanese ace Sabaru Sakai, who encountered P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could take down a P-40 with just a few shots, seemed ineffective. I fired dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away unscathed. Their return fire was frightening. Streams of heavy bullets ripped through aircraft. The P-47N, designed for the Pacific, had increased fuel capacity with wet wings holding 93 gallons each. This enhancement extended its range to 2,350 miles. This version would escort B-29s to Japan, showing that the short-range fighter of 1943 had transformed into a genuine long-range weapon. The greatest validation of the P-47's evolution came during encounters with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me 262, capable of reaching 540 miles per hour, seemed unbeatable by propeller-driven fighters. However, Thunderbolt pilots found ways to catch those jets. They targeted them during vulnerable moments, specifically takeoff and landing, as well as in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Shee, Mir of the 352nd Fighter Group, became one of the first pilots to shoot down a Me-262 using a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Mir's Thunderbolt reached near 500 miles per hour, fast enough to match the jet in level flight. The jet pilot, self-assured in his speed, never noticed the diving P-47 until Mir's guns fired at 400 yards. Mir's combat report stated, "The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, broke away from the fuselage. The pilot did not survive. The focused fire of 850 caliber guns proved more effective against jet aircraft than we predicted." By early 1945, specialized P-47M variants were introduced to specifically target German jets and V-1 flying bombs, with water methanol injection boosting power to 2,800 horsepower and improved aerodynamics. These ultimate Thunderbolts could hit speeds of 470 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, allowing them to intercept jets under certain conditions. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron, equipped with P-47s, shot down 2 Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized firepower over speed. While the jets were faster, they could not turn well and could not absorb damage. One solid burst from our guns, and they fell apart like paper. They had to slow down to engage bombers. That's when we could catch them. The culmination of American industrial strength was showcased during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to eliminate Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, featuring their top pilots, launched surprise assaults on Allied airfields in Belgium and the Netherlands. At the Y-34 airfield near Metz, which was home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47, the initial attack was effective. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground, along with several other aircraft. A captured German pilot brought to the command post pointed at the burning planes and mocked, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking's response became legendary within the 9th Air Force. He pointed to the flight line where ground crews were already moving damaged aircraft out of the way and setting up hard stands for replacements. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The smirks of the German pilots disappeared. Within 48 hours, brand new P-47 D-40s arrived, flown in from depots in England. In the process, the Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in Bodenplatte, including many who were irreplaceable, like instructors and squadron leaders. These losses could never be filled. The Americans, on the other hand, lost 134 aircraft across all attacked airfields, all of which were replaced within a week. The numbers clearly indicated an inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island manufactured one Thunderbolt every hour around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana, which was built on empty farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 individual components, machined to tolerances of a thousandth of an inch. Yet American workers, including many women who had never seen an aircraft before the attack on Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision that surpassed peacetime standards. The production of ammunition was equally impressive. Each P-47 sortie needed 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, with hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions. Ammunition consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, among several ammunition plants, produced 30 million rounds monthly. Each cartridge was manufactured to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch, ensuring reliable feeding through the synchronized gun mechanisms. The fuel consumption was staggering. Each P-47 required significant amounts of fuel to operate effectively. The Thunderbolt consumed 100 gallons of fuel per hour during regular flights, and up to 300 gallons when water injection was activated in combat. By late 1944, the 9th Air Force alone was using more than 25 million gallons of aviation fuel every month. This fuel was transported across the Atlantic in tankers, all made possible by American mass production. Even more remarkable than the production of aircraft was the training of pilots. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots a year from advanced training programs. This number surpassed the total pilots trained by Germany throughout the entire war. Each pilot of the P-47 received at least 400 hours of flight training before entering combat, which included 100 hours on advanced fighters. In contrast, German pilots had less than 100 hours of total experience by the end of the war. The difference in quality became evident during combat. American pilots arrived in Europe skilled in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, making them aware of their enemy's capabilities and weaknesses. Additionally, they had thorough knowledge of their aircraft systems, having studied technical manuals that German pilots never received. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, who arrived in England in September 1944, highlighted the advantages of American training. He had 420 hours logged, with 75 hours specifically in the P-47. He had practiced shooting at towed targets, worked on deflection shooting, and analyzed gun camera footage from real combat. When he went on his first mission, he was fully prepared. The German pilot he encountered likely had less than half of his experience. It was truly an uneven matchup. In March 1945, Oberleutnant Josef Priller, the same pilot who had ridiculed the P-47s 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials trying to boost morale. However, his statement, deemed too demoralizing for publication, highlighted a dramatic shift in German attitudes. He admitted that the Thunderbolt was the best fighter bomber ever made. Its firepower was unmatched. The weapons never jammed, never overheated, and they did not run out of ammunition under normal combat conditions. It could carry bombs like a medium bomber, fire rockets like artillery, and engage as a fighter when necessary. Yet, beyond the machine itself, it represented something larger. It symbolized limitless American production. They lost 10, and they built 20. We lost 1, and it was gone forever. Their pilots were arriving better trained than our own instructors. They had ample fuel for training, ammunition for practice, and spare parts for everything. We were left with nothing but courage. But courage without resources only leads to a delayed defeat. They mocked us in 1943. But now, there is no laughter. When those guns roar, you know death has arrived. That sound lingers in our memories. It is mechanical, precise, and relentless. Like everything American, it represents overwhelming material power. They did not defeat us with superior tactics or more courageous pilots. They buried us in a deluge of steel and lead. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe was mostly a ghost. Fuel shortages kept many aircraft grounded. Experienced pilots had either died or been captured. Airfields lay in ruins, craters everywhere. Yet even if they had fuel and planes, German pilots faced an impossible situation. Attacking meant confronting P-47 formations that dominated the skies from ground level to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Brechtender, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, completed just one combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted 12 seconds. He recalled seeing them dive from above, 4 Thunderbolts in flawless formation. He tried to maneuver, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. His aircraft shook as if struck by sledgehammers. The engine exploded, and the wing tore off. He barely escaped. As he descended in the parachute, he witnessed them destroy his entire squadron. 6 fighters were obliterated in less than a minute. The sky was filled with burning metal and bodies. The psychological effect was devastating. German pilots suffered what medical officers termed jabbo fever. They exhibited physical symptoms of stress when P-47s were reported nearby. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before missions against Thunderbolts. The distinct roar of approaching P-47s instilled panic in ground troops. They knew that survival depended on finding cover immediately. The final numbers from P-47 operations were astonishing. In Europe, 3,752 German aircraft were shot down in air combat and 3,015 on the ground. They destroyed 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armoured fighting vehicles, 68,000 trucks, and 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles. In the Pacific, they destroyed 697 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat and 150 on the ground. They also destroyed 1,500 vehicles, 150 locomotives, countless barges, ships, and installations. The 9th Air Force, primarily flying P-47A, completed 213,873 combat sorties. They dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. The Thunderbolt units achieved a ratio of 4.6 to 1. The P-47 Thunderbolt boasted an impressive kill ratio in aerial combat, all while having the lowest loss rate among Allied fighter bombers. However, behind those numbers was a heavy human cost. The Luftwaffe lost around 28,000 pilots who were killed in action against the Western Allied forces. Many of these losses were due to the concentrated fire from American heavy machine guns. Each pilot killed was a loss that Germany could not replace, representing years of training gone to waste. By the end of the war, the average German fighter pilot had less than 30 hours of combat experience, while the average P-47 pilot had more than 200. At the Luftwaffe Interrogation Center in Oberursel, captured Allied pilots were debriefed by German intelligence. Records that were captured in 1945 revealed how the Germans assessed Allied aircraft. The file on the P-47 was updated regularly throughout the war and showed a complete shift in opinion. In April 1943, it was described as a large, unwieldy fighter. It was deemed inferior to German aircraft in all performance areas except dive speed. The machine gun armament was considered insufficient against cannon-armed fighters, leading to a minimal threat assessment. By December 1943, assessments changed. The P-47 was recognized for its exceptional high-altitude performance and extreme structural strength. Firepower was becoming increasingly troublesome, and pilots were improving their tactics. At this point, it was seen as a significant threat above 25,000 feet. By June 1944, the P-47 was labeled as the dominant fighter-bomber, superior to all German types at altitudes above 20,000 feet. Its firepower was devastating against all target types, and its structural strength made it hard to shoot down. This led to an assessment of critical threat at all altitudes. By March 1945, the P-47 was declared the best fighter-bomber of the war. Its combination of firepower, durability, and performance was unmatched. The quality of its pilots was exceptional, leading to an assessment of being unsustainable in direct engagement. In 1985, at a reunion of German and American fighter pilots in Phoenix, Arizona, former enemies came together in peace. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, the former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked about the P-47. His response, captured on video, reflected a complete transformation in understanding. He said, "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this large, heavy fighter and laughed. We thought the Americans didn't know air combat. We said they had built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the ones who didn't understand. The Americans didn't try to create a European fighter. They designed an American one focused on production, firepower, and survivability. They understood that in a war of attrition, the aircraft that could endure punishment and deliver devastating firepower would prevail. They were right. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power of the aircraft was staggering. It climbed as if it were defying gravity. The cockpit offered comfort. Visibility was outstanding. The controls were precise. This was truly an aircraft designed for pilots and wrapped in armor. What struck me most was recognizing that America produced over 15,000 of these intricate machines while simultaneously fighting in two oceans. Each aircraft had an engine that was more advanced than anything Germany made, yet they managed to produce them faster than we could make simpler fighters. That realization made it clear to me that we never stood a chance. Those guns, nicknamed Roosevelt's piano because of their distinctive sound, left a lasting impression. Once you heard it, it stayed with you. Many of my friends experienced that sound for the last time. The P-47 did not just defeat the Luftwaffe, it obliterated it. The design of the P-47 perfectly captured American industrial philosophy. It was a product of powerful engineering supported by endless resources. Every part was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. The wing spars could handle 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The engine mount was capable of withstanding forces of 12 G. Control cables were doubled throughout, complete with automatic backup systems. The ammunition feed system was a marvel of engineering in itself. 8 separate ammunition boxes, each containing 425 rounds, fed into the system through electric boost motors to prevent jams during tricky maneuvers. To avoid freezing at high altitudes, the guns were electrically heated. Each gun had its own charging mechanism and could be synchronized independently. Pilots could adjust the convergence from 150 to 400 yards, tailoring it to their preferred engagement range. Even after the war, some German veterans argued that the P-47 succeeded due to quantity rather than quality, believing German fighters were technically superior but overwhelmed by sheer numbers. However, the combat records tell a different tale. In battles where the numbers were equal, P-47s consistently came out on top. The heavy machine gun armament, often considered inferior to cannons, proved to be more effective in real combat situations. Analyzing gun camera footage revealed why cannon shells, while individually more lethal, required precise aim and had limited ammunition, typically only 120 to 200 rounds total. The P-47's weapons generated a cloud of bullets that ensured hits even with less than perfect aim. At typical engagement distances, a 2-second burst would deliver at least 20 rounds to a fighter-sized target, more than enough to ensure destruction. The ammunition itself was superior. The American 50-caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds featured a delayed action fuse. This design ensured they penetrated targets before detonating. The incendiary material burned at an intense 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That heat was sufficient to ignite aluminum structures. In contrast, the German 20mm shells, while heavier, often exploded on impact, resulting in flashy but sometimes shallow damage. The P-47 Thunderbolt holds the record as the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever produced on a large scale. Its empty weight of 10,000 pounds surpassed the total weight of some twin-engine fighters. The engine generated more power than entire bomber formations from the previous conflict. Its weaponry delivered more firepower than a squad of infantry. Yet, this aircraft was manufactured by the thousands. Young pilots, barely out of high school, flew them, while mechanics, who learned quickly in a matter of weeks, maintained them under battle conditions. In less than 2 years, German perceptions transformed from ridicule to fear. The once disparaged flying milk bottle became the most dreaded aircraft in the experience of the Luftwaffe. Veterans who had confronted Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet Yaks without hesitation spoke of P-47s in quiet tones long after the war. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D stands alongside other legendary fighters. The informational placard details specifications and battle honors, but a small display case tells the real story. It contains spent .50 caliber shells and a strip of gun camera footage depicting a Focke-Wulf 190 breaking apart under fire. Beneath the display lies a quote from an unnamed German pilot taken from a 1945 interrogation report. "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They simply pointed those guns at you and you ceased to exist." The laughter died with our comrades. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as a target of mockery but left the war as an instrument of destruction. During that time, its 8 synchronized Browning machine guns reshaped the tactics of air combat and overwhelmed the Luftwaffe under a barrage of lead. German pilots had laughed at the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.